The next morning, Pete had woke everyone up nice and early and woke up everyone to get a move for the day. The rest of the group stayed behind in the cabin, while Pete led Nick and Lee down towards the river, where his fish traps were supposed to be. To be safe, Lee had handed his rifle over to Carly in exchange for her Glock 17. Since he had more experience with pistols and the fact that they carried more ammunition, but he did not expect anything to go wrong. And even if they encountered trouble, Pete and Nick both armed with Winchester and Model 70 each. Pete and Lee continued to make a conversation with each other while they were walking through the woods together. But as for Nick, he had stopped for a moment to take a piss upon the tree, and so they both decided to continue to move on without him. "So Lee, how is it that you made it all the way out here?" Pete inquired with a polite tone, but kept his eyes focused towards the path they were walking down. "We found a survivor a few weeks back. He got bit, but he told us about a place called Wellington," Lee answered, shifting his eyes towards Pete's rifle when he noticed his rifle slightly. "We thought we would try and head there. We were with others, but it's a tough world out there," Pete admitted, turning sideways as he carefully slid between a gap of barbed wire fences. "I gotta ask, how old is Clementine?" "She's 11. At least I think so," Lee replied, unable to keep count of how many days has passed since the events of Savannah. Pete continued to make his way down towards the river, while telling Lee yet a funny yet shocking story about his nephew. "She was around Nick's age when I first took him hunting. We came across this beautiful buck just standing there. The boy aims his rifle like I taught him, and he had taken a great shot, but when I hear him start whining, 'I can't do it! I can't do it, Uncle Pete! Please don't make me shoot it!'" Lee then chuckled slightly at Pete's voice as he tried to mimic Nick when he was a kid. But Lee will have to admit he would be tough for the little kid, but he still found it to be quite funny story. "Man, I don't believe that. Hey!" The duo stopped in their tracks and shifted their attention towards the way they came. Nick came running down with his rifle clutched in his grip. He planted the couple of times when he finally caught up. He demanded an explanation to being ditched. "Why didn't you wait? You want us standing around while you take a piss on the tree? You know where the river is, Nick," Pete replied, ignoring his nephew and resuming his way down towards the path. Continuing his story to Lee. "Anyway, so I go to grab the gun out of his hand and boom, boy nearly gut shot at me. And of course the buck got away." Nick angrily glared towards his uncle with a hateful expression, suspecting his uncle was trying to make him look like an idiot again. "Why are you telling him this for? Maybe you just almost shot him yesterday," Pete suggested, recalling the previous day when he stopped walking again, knowing that there was going to be an argument between them and both. "Maybe I'm just trying to show that you're not a happy-go kind of gun." Nick assumed that his uncle was just trying to embarrass him again, like he did in the past, and not willing to just let him get away with it. "Why are you trying to give me this hard time?" "Because you give everyone else a hard time," Pete quickly responded, showing a normal expression across his face as they argued. "I apologized to them last night. Carly and Lee accepted it," Nick assured. "Okay, well, I didn't know that," Pete replied. Lee decided to not get involved between the two, since they were family, and nowadays it was important that family always get along, no matter what, because family was important now. Heck, it must be the important thing in the world. He had sense that the situation was about to say something when he diffused the situation, but it was not quick enough. "Leaving us again?" Pete inquired, followed to be a slight annoyance, and since he wished Nick would just grow up and stop acting like a child. Nick began to storm off and shove past the two, not daring to look back towards them, with a hateful expression across his face. "I don't need you, Pete. I know where the river is." Pete then shook his head and had both sides of the moment, before continuing his way up towards the river, with it continuing to the rest of the story to Lee, even despite the fact that Nick was frustrated by it. "Anyway, I managed to catch that same buck a little while later, brought it to my sisters. Nick didn't speak to me for weeks. Sometimes you just gotta do the hard thing, even if it means hurting those you love. You know what I mean?" "Yeah, I hear you," Lee assured, thinking back at the most things he did in the past, like killing that senator who slept with his wife. helping Duck rather than Sean, and remembering that woman who got bit and wanting nothing more to do than to end her suffering. Nick doesn't hate you though. In this age and day, everyone's just worried, and you gotta remember, family's important nowadays. Pete took note of what the younger man said, realizing that he was right, and some of the words were just spoken to him. You're right, Lee. You see, Nick's father was not around much, and when he was just nothing but an asshole. So I thought I was responsible to raise the boy up properly, and I just couldn't be nice. Uncle Pete, Nick called out from his uncle from a distance, at the same time finishing his sentence for him without even knowing. Lee and Pete made a haste and began running towards the riverfront when hearing Nick calling out to them. Both of them raised their weapons up, suspecting that there may be a horde of walkers nearby. When they arrived, Lee and Pete stood beside Nick, and what caught their eyes next left them shocked. Multiple corpses were scattered across the area, bullet holes and shot in different parts of the body, and blood smeared across their bodies and dripping down towards the ground. It was a massacre, but the question was, who did this yet to be answered? All of them have full of bullet holes, Pete declared, stating that the obvious ones he carefully hoping that one of the corpses, since some of them may not be dead. Dead. Check their bodies, and for ammo. I only got 2 shots left. Lee was shocked to see what had happened there, feeling somewhat like he was going to throw up. He glared over at the other side of the river, seeing more corpses on the other side. There are more of them over there, you guys, he said, gesturing his arm over towards the other side of the river. Pete followed to where he was pointing, seeing the corpses on the other side of the river. Let's go. And check it out, Nick. You stay here. Lee, you search the middle part. I'll go over there. Lee followed him over the river, but as for Nick, he did not agree with this plan at all, and was worried that whoever did this might be lurking around. What are you both doing? We gotta get the hell out of here. Nick, stay calm, Lee ordered, sensing that he was getting worried. I don't like this, Nick admitted, raising his rifle up and beginning to scan the area cautiously, fearing trouble was about to happen. We need to get out of here. He called out to the older men. Nick, then what are you going to do? Realize? Nick, Peter inquired, turning back towards him with an expression of annoyance across his face. What? You both are crazy. And that you're an asshole? Nick inquired, groaning slightly under his breath. That nobody is going to care if you like something or not, Peter clashed again, wishing his nephew would just grow up and stop acting like a child and then begin acting like an adult rather than a young kid who almost shot him. You gotta grow up, son. Nick merely groaned in frustration, turned his back towards his uncle. He began searching some of the corpses, though nevertheless, but if he did find ammo, he would have mostly likely taken the ammo for himself. Lee stood in the middle of the area where he spotted the corpses around. He kept his attention focused on the one that had reanimated to a walker, and was now trying to reach out towards Lee for a fresh meal. But a spear impaled in the stomach kept him from getting up. Poor bastard, Lee mumbled to himself. Deciding to put the walker out of his misery and end its suffering, he held his foot against his strength, and to keep him down, while he grabbed onto the spear and pulled it out of its stomach. He grunted as he slammed the spear directly into the walker's forehead, killing him instantly. Now that he wasn't going to be walking anywhere, Lee knelt down and checked the corpses for anything useful, but all he found in the pockets were a few bucks, and money did not matter anymore. He stood up to a full height, and another corpse caught his attention in the corner of his eye. Curiosity got the best of him. He marched over towards the corpse that still seemed like it moving, but it did not look like it was snarling. Instead, it looked like it was breathing still. Lee got to the other side of the walker and was shocked to see the man was still alive. He looked like a Caucasian American, around his mid-30s, and he had a longish black hair with a mustache. Lee felt somewhat sympathy for the man and did want to help him, but there was nothing he could do, and this man was going to die. He took the note that the man was still being conscious, and even tried to communicate with them. When he kneeled down, nudging his arm slightly. Hey, what happened? Can you hear me? The man merely groaned and spat out blood from the inside of his mouth as he struggled to get the words out to a completely stranger, but he was too weak to speak properly. Wah. Water. When Lee noticed the word water in his sentence, assuming he needed a drink, he shook his head in response. Sorry, I don't have any water, man. Do you know what happened? The man tried his best to respond, but he was too weak from blood loss and slowly began to close his eyes. Unable to communicate much further, he didn't say much. Lee shook his shoulder in an attempt to wake him back up. Lee suddenly bolted up in a jolt of panic when he heard a scream nearby, followed by a gunshot. He shifted over his attention towards the river, where Pete was investigating. The older man had jumped back when a walker suddenly appeared from the ground, and that he was able to shoot. Ah! Pete! Lee called out to him, and Eva was prepared to charge over to assist him. Nick panicked when he heard his uncle scream, and shouted out for him on the other side of the river. Uncle Pete? I'm fine, just lost my footing, Pete assured, panting slightly, as he was shocked to the fact of the attack, but unfortunately for him, that was not the only problem he had to worry about. He closed his eyes and mumbled to himself, God damn it, God damn it! Lee arched his eyebrow to see why he was so upset. He did manage to shoot the walker, but when he looked down near Pete's leg, and his eyes widened, he noticed a bite mark down at the bottom of his right leg. Holy shit! Lee gasped, realizing there was nothing he could do to save him. Before anyone could blink, growling and snarling noises echoed from the trees. There were multiple walkers emerging from the woods on both sides. Gunshots were fired everywhere outside of the riverbank, and outside the river by Nick, whom called out the duo as he continued firing as many shots as he could towards the walkers surrounding him. Shit! Lurkers! Peter raised his rifle up too, and fired at the closest walker, but when he pulled the trigger again, he discovered he was out of ammo. Shit! I'm out of ammo! Both of you get over here! I'll cover you, Nick assured, thinking it was safer for his uncle and his friend to come their way. I got ammo! Damn it, Lee! Nick, get over here now, Pete ordered, knowing that there was not many walkers on his side, and this gave Moore the chance to escape. Lee consistently turned towards both men, trying to decide who he should go with. He looked over towards Pete and confirmed he was right, but being on his side being safe, but he knew that Pete was bitten. Nick's side was clearly not safe at all, but Nick was still aimed with ammunition, and he was still all the way to come from. But then again, Nick wasn't exactly the greatest marksman in the world. Running out of time on deciding who to help, Lee pulled out his Glock and charged towards Pete, who was standing as fast as he could go. For someone who is now 39 years old, he was still able to run like an athlete. Pete waved his arm out to both men, calling them out as loud as he could. Come on, come on! He suddenly panicked when a walker tackled him to a nearby boulder. When he was not looking, he placed his good leg upon the walker's stomach in an attempt to hold it back. Jesus! Lee raised his weapon up to see Pete fighting with the walker, knowing that he was going to have to shoot now or he'd be devoured by walkers. He fired 2 shots and hit one walker in the shoulder, but the other shot hit the walker between its eyes, killing it instantly. Pete, are you okay? Lee inquired, taking his hand and helping him stand up, despite him being bit right now. Pete did not have time to answer already. He feared for his nephew's safety. He looked over to the other side of the river. Nick had not listened to him and continued to fire his remaining rounds every time a walker nearby. Lee was sure wished he brought along his Browning automatic safari rifle with him. Nick! But Lee panicked and raised his Glock 17 and fired multiple shots upon the horde of walkers coming towards him. He looked over to the other side of the river, and he could see the older man was fighting over the walkers using his rifle as a melee weapon. Shit, we gotta help him! Pete agreed in an attempt to run over towards his nephew, but his bitten leg made it difficult. Lee continued to cover him by firing his Glock 17 towards the walkers, emerging in the woods. Nick, hold on! Pete yelled, limping as he tried to get to the other side of the river to help his nephew. Nick! On the other side of the river, Nick froze for a moment as the walkers were standing only a couple feet away from him. He had no ammunition left and was able to fight them forever. In an act of panic to escape, Nick then turned around and ran back towards the woods to invade the horde of walkers, hopefully heading back towards the cabin. God damn it, Nick! Pete called out to him for the second time, yelling at the top of his lungs, but it was no use. His nephew had vanished into the woods. We can't help him, we gotta go, Lee ordered, grabbing his arm, and they lead him to the woods. Hopefully they would outrun the horde of walkers that were chasing them. Pete did not want to leave, but he had no choice if he wanted to survive a little longer. He followed Lee into the woods, limping as fast as he could, in an attempt to outrun the walkers. When that easy in the past, it was the bite in his old age, Pete was not as quick as he used to be. As they both prayed and they were going to make it out of this okay, and hoped Nick was going to be okay on his own. It sure wasn't going to be easy to lose the horde of walkers chasing them and get back into the cabin in one piece. After a few minutes of running through the woods of Carolina, Lee and Pete tried to keep quiet for as long as they could, as the walkers could be heard banging against the door from the outside. They were separated from Nick near a river, and the duo was forced to run away, now hiding in a cigarette truck, in an attempt to avoid the pursuing walkers. Lee grunted as Pete locked the door hard enough to make sure that it could not be opened at all. Sure, the van was made out of hard steel, but after all, there was nothing wrong with being extra careful. That ought to do it, he declared, leaning back towards the inside of the truck, panting a few times. Jesus, Nick. So what are we going to do? Lee inquired, sitting down on the opposite side of Pete. Not sure, Pete replied, scanning the inside of the truck for anything useful. I'm just worried about Nick. He's out there somewhere. He got away. I'm sure he knows his way back to the cabin, Lee reassured him. Maybe. I don't know. God damn it, Nick, Pete mumbled to himself quietly, holding his head from side to side for a moment. Couldn't he just listen to me? Could he? If he did, we'd all be back in this truck by now. I'm sure he's fine, Lee replied, standing up so he couldn't go and investigate the truck they were in for anything useful. Knowing that they might be here for a while, he looked towards Pete's leg, only just remembering that he'd been bitten. Pete, you know you've just been bit. I know, I ain't stupid, Pete reassured, groaning slightly as the unbearable pain of the infection shot through his leg. He looked towards the stacked shelves and spotted something useful that may just be able to save his life. Pass me that hacksaw. Lee hesitated for a moment to do so, but nevertheless, he obeyed his request and handed him the hacksaw. Pete clutched the hacksaw tight in his grip, knowing that it had to be done if he wanted to live. But then again, what if the infection already passed and spread to his body? He did not know, but for the sake of his nephew, he had to try. Pete groaned while preparing to cut the leg off, but he changed his mind after all. He all of a sudden threw the hacksaw away. Forget it. I'll just bleed to death before anyone would find us. Do you think they're looking for us? Lee inquired. Not sure, but I ain't going to make it, Lee, Pete replied. Deep down he was afraid that he was going to die from the infection. And worse, he would never see his nephew again. I'm going to have a look around, Lee said, changing the subject for a moment, as he made his way over towards the driver and passenger seats. Sure, Pete replied, not seeming to be too bothered by what he was doing. He was too sad that he may not see his nephew again. His nephew may be an idiot, but at this point, he was sure the idiot to take care of. After Nick's mother had passed on, Pete made a vow to her that he would protect Nick and be with him no matter what. Pete was close to death now, and there was nothing he could do to prevent that. Pete sighed when Lee had returned and shifted his attention back towards the doors and could hear the walkers banging hard as they could on the outside. Bastards ain't letting them up. You think they'll get in? Lee inquired, worried that if he tried to escape, they could easily get him. But also, if he stayed too long, Pete would become one of them, and he'd be trapped there with them. Not sure. Doubt it, though, Pete admitted, trying to get himself comfortable, as he suspected they were going to be there for a while. Better get comfy, Lee. Looks like we're going to be in here for a while. Lee did not like the idea he was suggesting, and folded his arms together as Pete lay down towards the metal-cold ground, resting his head on his right arm. He also feared that if he went to sleep, he might not wake up if Pete does change. What's that? We're just going to sit here? Would you rather go out there? Pete inquired, shutting his eyes hard as he tried to get some sleep, but found it difficult since the walkers were trying to get inside. The thought of him turning into a walker sent fear down his spine. Point taken, he replied, sitting against the back of the driver's seat, trying to get some sleep for a while to pass the time. Before long, Lee found himself getting tired, too, and could no longer keep his eyes open awake for too long. He drifted off to sleep in a matter of seconds, despite many walkers banging on the door or the truck outside. Before drifting off, he prayed that Lee would not turn into a walker and take a bite out of his neck while he was sleeping.